Bombshell tonight, we learned the FBI is probing 11 U.S. space scientists either dead or missing.
She sent the text 4 hours before she died. Not to family, not to a crisis line, to the colleagues and friends she trusted most. And what she wrote was not a goodbye. It was a warning. "If I am found dead," Amy Eskridge typed, "I did not repeat, did not commit suicide. If you hear that I overdosed, I did not. If you hear that I killed myself or anybody else, I did not." She was 34 years old. She held a PhD. She held top-level security clearance. She was working simultaneously on a classified Homeland Security project, a study of anti-gravity propulsion technology and free energy extraction, the kind of research that, in certain circles, is considered the most politically volatile science on Earth. And 4 hours after she sent those texts, she was dead. The official cause of death was a self-inflicted gunshot wound. That is not a rumor. That is not speculation. Those are the documented facts surrounding the death of one American scientist. But Amy Eskridge is not alone in this investigation. She is one of 11. 11 United States space scientists, researchers, nuclear engineers, intelligence officers, Air Force officials who are either dead or missing under circumstances that have prompted a federal investigation, congressional hearings, and the kind of FBI involvement that almost never happens unless the national security of this country is perceived to be at direct and immediate risk. 11 names, and every single one of them is connected to classified work that most Americans do not know exists. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is a documented, federally investigated pattern of death and disappearance that begins with some of the most sensitive and classified scientific research programs in the United States government. And it starts with a question that no official has answered. What happened to them, and why? Welcome to TrueCrime Hex. This channel is dedicated to investigating the cases that demand more than a headline. If you are new here, welcome. What follows is a methodical reconstruction of everything that is documented, everything that is confirmed, and everything that the evidence compels us to take seriously. This is not speculation. This is not storytelling for shock value. This is the case, examined with the precision it demands. To understand what is happening here, and something is happening here, the evidence demands we accept that premise. It is necessary to understand what these scientists were working on. This is not a group of researchers who shared an office. They did not all work for the same agency. They were not all in the same field. What they shared was something more specific and more dangerous than a professional connection. What they shared was proximity to classified programs, special access programs, known in federal parlance as SAPs, that represent the most restricted category of government research in existence. These are not simply classified programs. They are programs so sensitive that even their existence is often classified. Personnel working within SAPs operate under strict compartmentalization protocols. You cannot carry your phone. You cannot discuss your work. In many cases, you cannot even acknowledge that the program exists to family members who hold the same clearance level but work in a different program. There are approximately 80% of the United States military's special access programs that fall under a single funding and oversight structure. And that structure, for a significant period of time, was managed in part by one man. That man is now missing. But before getting to him, because his disappearance is, in many ways, the center of gravity for this entire investigation, it is necessary to begin at the beginning. It is necessary to begin with Matthew Sullivan. Matthew Sullivan was 39 years old. He was a former United States Air Force intelligence officer. The word former is important here, but it is not a distancing word. Intelligence officers do not simply stop having the knowledge they accumulated over a career of service inside the most sensitive programs this government runs. The clearances may lapse. The badge may be returned. The briefings may cease, but the knowledge remains. It does not expire. It does not become inert when the employment contract ends. It stays with the person who holds it, and it makes that person valuable or dangerous, depending on who is doing the assessment for as long as they are alive to speak. And Matthew Sullivan was prepared to speak. He was scheduled to testify at a whistleblower hearing on Capitol Hill. The hearing was organized to receive testimony from individuals with direct knowledge of the government's handling of unidentified aerial phenomena, not as a fringe exercise, not as political theater, but as a formal congressional proceeding with legal protections for witnesses established under federal whistleblower statute. Sullivan had knowledge of UFOs and UFO intelligence within the United States military, knowledge he had accumulated during a career as an Air Force intelligence officer, knowledge that, under the protections of congressional testimony, he was legally entitled and apparently determined to disclose. Matthew Sullivan never testified. He died before he could. The precise circumstances of his death remain under scrutiny. Those closest to him have stated publicly and on the record that the circumstances do not align with what they knew of him as a person, as a professional, or as someone who had expressed a clear intention to testify. He had a reason to live. He had a goal. He had a scheduled appearance before the United States Congress in which he was going to say, under oath, things about the government's knowledge of aerial phenomena that have not entered the public record. That is not a legal conclusion about the cause of his death. It is not a forensic finding. It is a documented fact about what he intended to do and what he never got to do. And in this investigation, that kind of fact does not sit in isolation. It sits alongside 10 other cases, and the pattern it forms is not something that can be explained away. Joshua LeBlanc was 29 years old. He was a NASA nuclear scientist. He was not working on routine projects. He was working on nuclear propulsion for NASA, the technology that would be required to send human beings beyond the inner solar system within a time frame that is practical rather than theoretical, eliminating the fundamental constraint that chemical rocket propulsion places on deep space exploration. He was, by all documented accounts, a brilliant researcher at the beginning of what should have been a decades-long career. A 29-year-old scientist working on one of the most consequential engineering challenges in human history. He was based in Huntsville, Alabama, a city that is, not incidentally, also home to several other individuals in this investigation. Huntsville is where the rocket science lives. It is where the aerospace defense contractors operate. It is where the proximity to classified federal programs creates a particular kind of professional density that most American cities do not have. The people in Huntsville who hold clearances know each other. They move in the same institutional orbit. Their work, however compartmentalized, exists within the same gravitational field. At approximately 4:30 in the morning, Joshua LeBlanc was reported missing. This requires examination, because the hour matters. 4:30 in the morning is not a time of day at which people simply go for a walk without telling anyone. It is not a time associated with routine behavior or spontaneous decision-making. It is a time that demands an explanation that has not been publicly provided. And what made this disappearance immediately unusual was not only the hour, but what Joshua LeBlanc left behind. He left his wallet. He left his keys. He left his phone. Those three items, wallet, keys, phone, represent, in the modern era, the three things a person does not leave behind unless they intend to leave without being tracked, without being found, or unless they had no agency in what happened to them. In case after case in this investigation, that same pattern repeats. No phone, no keys, no identification. Not because these individuals were absent-minded, not because they forgot, because those items were either deliberately left behind or deliberately removed from them, and the difference between those two possibilities matters enormously, but both produce the same forensic result. A person who cannot be located using the standard tools of modern search and identification. Huntsville police searched for Joshua LeBlanc through the morning and into the afternoon. They searched through the hours when daylight arrived and made physical search viable. They continued as the morning became afternoon. At 2:45 in the afternoon, roughly 10 hours after he was reported missing, his Tesla was involved in a crash. The description of that crash is not of a minor collision. The vehicle was destroyed in a fire severe enough that his body was not identifiable for 3 days. 3 days. The forensic process that typically takes hours, that is designed to be fast precisely because identifications matter and families need answers, took 3 days. But here is where the case becomes something that cannot be set aside and cannot be explained by any conventional account of what happened. Joshua LeBlanc's Tesla was equipped with Sentry Mode, the vehicle's passive surveillance system, which records activity around the car even when it is parked and unoccupied. The system operates continuously. It does not require activation. It does not require the driver to be present. It records, and that recorded data was retrieved by investigators. What it showed was this. Joshua LeBlanc's Tesla was parked at the Huntsville International Airport for 4 hours on the morning he was reported missing. 4 hours. Beginning around the time of his disappearance and extending through the morning while a search was being conducted at the airport. For 4 hours, while he was reported missing. That is not speculation. That is the vehicle's own recorded data produced by a system designed precisely to capture objective, time-stamped evidence of what a vehicle does and where it goes. The car was at the airport for 4 hours. At the airport, the point of departure, the place you go when someone is arriving or when someone is leaving, when a transit is happening for 4 hours in the early morning while its registered owner was officially listed as a missing person. What happened at that airport during those 4 hours has not been publicly disclosed. Whether it has been privately disclosed to investigators is unknown. Whether the airport's own surveillance infrastructure, the cameras at the terminal, the parking facilities, the access roads captured anything relevant to this case has not been confirmed. Whether any passenger manifests from those 4 hours have been examined in connection with his disappearance has not entered the public record. These are questions the documented record does not yet answer. But the question of why a NASA nuclear scientist's vehicle spent 4 hours at an airport on the morning of his reported disappearance is not a question that can be categorized as answered, explained, or closed. Joshua LeBlanc was 29 years old. He was working on technology that a great many powerful institutions would prefer to control, delay, or extinguish. And the circumstances surrounding his death remain, as of this reporting, unresolved. Hit the like button on this video right now. Every like is a signal to the algorithm that this coverage is reaching people who are paying attention. Subscribe to True Crime Hex if you have not already. There are more names in this investigation, and every name demands the same level of scrutiny. Stay with this. Now, let us talk about General William Neil McCasland. If Matthew Sullivan was a data point and Joshua LeBlanc was a data point, General McCasland is the axis around which this entire investigation rotates. Not because he was the first to vanish, not because his case is the most dramatic in isolation, but because of what he knew, who he oversaw, and how many of the other individuals in this investigation are directly connected to him by documented lines of funding, oversight, and institutional relationship. Begin with the professional profile, because it is the only way to understand the gravity of what it means that this man is now missing. General McCasland commanded an entire United States Air Force base. He worked at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, a facility that has occupied a particular and documented position in the history of American classified research. Wright-Patterson is where captured technology has been analyzed. It is where engineering programs of extraordinary sensitivity have been run. It is where, if the testimony of any number of credentialed researchers, former officials, and documented congressional witnesses is to be taken seriously, some of the most significant and undisclosed scientific work in American history has taken place. This is not mythology. The base's role in the receipt and analysis of materials recovered from the Roswell, New Mexico incident in 1947 is documented in congressional testimony. What was done with those materials afterward is less documented. But the connection exists, and it is a connection that reemerges in this investigation through at least one other case. General McCasland did not simply work at Wright-Patterson. He oversaw a research and development program valued at $2 billion. But more than that, and this is the detail that requires the most careful attention, he was responsible for managing the funding of approximately 80% of the United States military's special access programs. Read that again. 80%. Not a subset, not a sample, not a representative cross-section. 80% of the SAPs that represent the most classified military research in existence flowed through his oversight. He knew what those programs were. He knew who ran them. He knew what they were producing. He knew what they were building toward. He knew, inevitably, which programs were succeeding and which were failing. He knew which programs had produced results that the government was not prepared to disclose. And he knew what the most sensitive programs in the American military-industrial complex were designed to keep classified indefinitely. The term used by those close to the investigation is chosen with precision. He was a walking hard drive of highly classified information. That is not hyperbole. That is not dramatization. That is a functional description of what it means to be the man who knew 80% of the country's most protected operational secrets. He was not an administrator in the ordinary sense. He was the institutional memory of the classified American aerospace and defense research enterprise, and he is gone. General McCasland disappeared from his home in less than 1 hour. The timeline has been reconstructed from what is documented and from witness accounts available in the public record. His wife saw him at home. A repairman who was present at the property also saw him an independent witness, someone with no personal investment in the case, someone who simply happened to be there and is now a documented part of the evidentiary record. At approximately 11:04 in the morning, his wife left for a hair appointment. She returned at approximately 12:04. General McCasland was gone. In less than 60 minutes, a man who had spent decades in the United States Air Force, who had risen to general officer rank, who had held command authority over an entire installation, who was described by those who knew him professionally as careful, methodical, and acutely security-conscious in all matters, disappeared without explanation from his own home. And he disappeared in a very specific way. He left behind his cell phone. He left behind his keys. He left behind his smartwatch, the device that, in the modern era, tracks heart rate, location, and activity on a continuous basis, and whose absence means that anyone attempting to locate him remotely would have no passive biometric or GPS signal to follow. He left behind his prescription glasses. He was wearing hiking boots. He took a .38 caliber handgun. Step back for a moment from the forensics and consider what this picture actually describes. A man leaves his home voluntarily or involuntarily. He has taken no method of electronic communication. He has taken no item that would passively broadcast his location. He has not taken the eyewear he needs to see clearly. He has chosen footwear appropriate for uneven terrain. He has taken a firearm. These are not the choices of a man who is confused or impaired. These are not the random decisions of someone in cognitive distress. These are deliberate selections, each item chosen or not chosen for a reason that reflects an understanding of what each item does and what its absence means. He has not, in any conventional sense, taken items that suggest panic or flight. He has taken items that suggest preparation, not the preparation of a man going for a casual afternoon walk, the preparation of a man who has thought carefully about what he will need and, more pointedly, about what he will leave behind and what leaving those things behind accomplishes. But there is one more item, and it is, in many ways, the most significant detail in the physical evidence of this disappearance. A gray Air Force sweatshirt, the only item he had been wearing that would have visually and immediately identified him as connected to the United States Air Force, as a military man, as a person embedded in the institutional structure of the American defense establishment, was found discarded by the side of the road. He had removed it and left it behind. The one visible marker of his military identity was shed before he disappeared into whatever came next. His wife's 911 call contains a statement that has been quoted in coverage of this case and that deserves to be held in careful attention. She said, "I do not think he wants to be found. I think he plans not to be found. That is the wife of a general speaking. That is not the statement of a spouse who believes her husband stepped out for groceries or took a wrong turn on a walk. That is a statement carrying within it something the documentation does not elaborate on. Whether she knew something she was choosing not to say, whether she was reading the physical evidence in front of her and arriving at the only logical conclusion it supported, whether there are facts known within that household that have not entered the public record, the documentation does not tell us, but the statement itself is recorded. And recorded statements in cases like this are among the most durable pieces of evidence available. What is documented is this: General McCasland is gone. He took a firearm and he took hiking boots. He removed the sweatshirt that identified him as connected to the Air Force. And 4 of the other scientists in this investigation are directly connected to him through funding lines, research programs, and institutional oversight. He funded their research. He oversaw their programs. He knew what they were working on, and now he and they are gone. But here is what nobody covering this story has connected. The same funding line that ran through McCasland's desk runs directly to the next name, and that name disappeared in 10 minutes, in front of a witness. Melissa Casillas was an administrator at 2 of the most sensitive research facilities in the United States, Los Alamos National Laboratory and the Air Force Research Laboratory, known as the AFRL. She held top security clearance. Her access was not administrative in the bureaucratic or clerical sense. It was operational clearance at facilities where the work being done does not appear in public budget documents and does not enter the public consciousness, through press releases or congressional testimony. She worked alongside another researcher identified in coverage of this investigation as Chavez, who also held top clearance at Los Alamos and the AFRL. They were colleagues with shared institutional access to the same classified research environment, and they vanished within weeks of each other. The last documented movements of Melissa Casillas are the kind of details that stay with an investigation precisely because they are so ordinary on their surface. She took her daughter a Subway sandwich for lunch. She told her daughter she was going to work from home. She appeared on surveillance footage, leaving her home at approximately 2 in the afternoon, walking briskly in an eastbound direction. She had no cell phone. She had no keys. She had no identifying objects. No wallet. Nothing. Cadaver dogs were deployed in the search. Scent dogs were deployed. An intensive physical search was conducted across the surrounding area. A shoe, a single shoe that may have belonged to Casillas, was found in a canyon. That is the only physical evidence recovered in connection with her disappearance. 1 shoe, in a canyon. No further trace. The dogs found nothing beyond that. The search teams found nothing. She had left, walked east, and disappeared from the documented record. But here is what the forensic evidence tells us. Evidence that the narrative of a woman simply walking away cannot explain and cannot accommodate. Before Melissa Casillas disappeared, her 2 phones were discovered to have been factory reset, not accidentally cleared, not damaged, not wiped by a software malfunction. Factory reset. The kind of deliberate, technically executed, complete erasure of stored data that leaves nothing, no contacts, no messages, no call history, no browsing data, no application files, no cache, no record of communication. Nothing from which investigators could reconstruct who she had spoken to, what she had been told, what she had planned, or what she had feared. Both phones. Reset. before she walked out the door. That is not the behavior of someone experiencing a mental health crisis. That is not the behavior of someone who has made an impulsive decision. That is the behavior of someone who understood that their digital communications represented either a risk to themselves or a risk to others, and who took deliberate and technically proficient steps to remove that record. Or it is the behavior of someone not Casillas herself who wanted that record removed before investigators had a chance to examine it. Her mother has stated publicly that Casillas would not have willingly left her daughter. That is the statement of a woman who knew her child, who understood her daughter's attachments and priorities, and who does not accept the most facile available explanation. It is not legal evidence. It is not forensic evidence. But it is human testimony from the person with the deepest knowledge of who Melissa Casillas was, and it cannot be dismissed as irrelevant. Chavez, whose full name has not been consistently available in public coverage of this investigation, shared Casillas' institutional home at Los Alamos and the AFRL, held the same level of top clearance, and vanished within weeks of her disappearance. Two people, same facilities, same clearance level, same approximate time frame. The documentation does not establish a direct causal connection between the two disappearances, but the documentation does establish the proximity, professional, institutional, and temporal, and proximity in an investigation with this many data points is not a detail to be categorized as coincidence and moved past two phones. Factory reset. Before she walked out the door, that is a signature. And it is not the last time that signature appears in this investigation. Monica Reza worked at the Air Force Research Laboratory. Her research specialty was jet propulsion, specifically the kind of advanced propulsion work that is funded not through conventional military contracts but through the Special Access Programs whose funding oversight, 80% of it, ran through General McCasland. She was connected to him directly through that funding architecture. Her program received his support, and she had a secondary area of research that deserves its own careful examination. She was working on what is referred to as memory metal. Memory metal is not a concept invented for science fiction or fringe research. It is a documented material science category encompassing shape memory alloys and related compounds, materials that, when deformed, return to a previously defined shape when subjected to specific conditions. In the context of this investigation, however, memory metal carries a specific and documented significance that extends beyond conventional material science. There is credentialed research and credentialed testimony from scientists, engineers, and former government officials suggesting that the material recovered at the Roswell, New Mexico crash site in 1947, material that was transported to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base where General McCasland later worked, exhibits properties consistent with what we now call memory metal. The material, when crumpled or deformed, reportedly returns to its original shape without external intervention. It cannot be easily cut or burned by conventional means. Its molecular structure, in the accounts of those who have examined it or examined those who examined it, does not conform to known metallurgical science of the 1940s or, in some assessments, to known metallurgical science of any subsequent decade, and it does not conform to what material science, as it currently exists, can produce or explain. Monica Reza was not working in isolation. She was working in a direct institutional lineage from the classified material recovery and analysis programs that began at Wright-Patterson in the late 1940s. Her jet propulsion work and her memory metal research existed within a funding ecosystem controlled and overseen by General McCasland, the man now gone from his own home, the man who shed his Air Force sweatshirt before he disappeared. The connection between them is not theoretical. It is institutional. It is documented. The funding ran from his desk to her laboratory, and what her laboratory was producing was research that descended, through a documented chain of scientific inheritance, from material that a government aircraft retrieved from the New Mexico desert more than 70 years ago. And Monica Reza disappeared in 10 minutes. She was not alone when it happened. That is the detail that requires the slowest and most deliberate examination, because this is not a case where a person was last seen leaving their home or walking out of a facility or captured on a surveillance camera heading in a particular direction. This is a case where a person disappeared in the presence of another human being, someone who was physically present, who had visual contact with her, who was close enough to see her wave and smile, and still, she vanished. Without sound, without a struggle, without any physical evidence of what happened next. She was hiking in the Los Angeles National Forest. She was with a female friend. The friend was ahead of her on the trail, not by a great distance, not by a separation that would typically constitute a loss of contact, but ahead of her in the way that two people hiking together naturally fall into a rhythm, one slightly in front, one slightly behind, both aware of each other, both expecting the other to still be there when the next glance back confirms the obvious. The friend looked back. Monica was there. She waved. She smiled. She was present physically, visibly, unambiguously present. The friend continued on the trail. And then, some minutes later, some handful of minutes, the space of time that it takes to round a bend, to navigate a section of uneven ground, to proceed through the ordinary geography of a hiking trail, the friend looked back again. Monica Reza was not there. No sound had preceded her absence. No cry, no stumble, no sound of impact, no human voice. Nothing that would alert a hiking companion to something going wrong, to something requiring attention, to something worth turning around for. One moment she was there, visible, present, waving, and in the next moment she was simply not there, and the forest, the Los Angeles National Forest, with its terrain and its density and its complexity, has not produced a single piece of evidence, physical or digital, to explain what happened to her in those 10 minutes. No search yielded her. No cadaver dog established a definitive trail. She was there, and then she was not. And the explanation for the distance between those two states is one that no official investigation has yet placed in the public record. The connection to General McCasland runs directly through the Air Force Research Laboratory. She was funded by AFRL. He ran AFRL. He oversaw the funding for her specific project. She is one of the 4 individuals who can be connected to him directly by institutional structure, by documented research relationships, by the flow of classified funding. And she is gone. And he is gone. And the institutional structure through which they were connected is now, effectively, leaderless, in the most literal possible sense, its commanding figure absent without explanation. But the pattern does not stop with Monica Reza, because there is another name, a name that fits the same template so precisely, so completely, so consistently with every other case in this investigation, that its presence in the record must be examined with the same forensic discipline as every case that preceded it. Stephen Garcia was a government contractor. That word contractor requires some unpacking, because in the context of classified federal research, the term does not mean what it means in civilian life. It does not mean a vendor relationship, a services agreement, a person brought in to perform a defined and visible task. In the world of special access programs, a contractor is often a person who performs classified work under a structure deliberately designed to separate that work from direct government employment records. The contractor relationship is, in many cases, a layer of institutional insulation, not between the work and the government, but between the work and the public record. The work is still classified. The clearance is still required. The secrecy protocols are still enforced. But the employment structure creates a degree of remove from direct government accountability that a full employee relationship would not. Stephen Garcia built parts for nuclear weapons. Full stop. He held the clearance necessary to do that work. He had access to the facilities and the technical specifications and the material science required to fabricate components for weapons in the most destructive category that human civilization has ever produced. And he was connected to the Air Force Research Laboratory, the same AFRL that employed Monica Reza, that was administered by Melissa Casillas, that ran the funding programs overseen by General McCasland. Stephen Garcia went for a walk. And he never came back. The physical evidence of his departure follows the same template that has appeared in this investigation, with a consistency that demands a name. Wallet left behind. Watch left behind. Phone left behind. Identification left behind. Everything that would allow him to be tracked, identified, or located through conventional investigative means was left at the point of departure. He walked away from those items with the same deliberateness, or the same deliberate removal by someone else, that appears in the case of General McCasland, in the case of Melissa Casillas, in the case of Joshua LeBlanc. The pattern is not a coincidence. Patterns with this many data points, in any forensic analysis, are never coincidences. They are signatures. And signatures, in criminal investigation, are evidence of methodology. They are evidence that whatever is happening to these individuals, whatever force or decision or event is producing these outcomes, is being produced by the same mechanism, repeated with precision, executed with an understanding of what electronic and physical evidence can reveal and how its absence shapes an investigation. He went for a walk, and the walk did not end, and he is not the last name on this list. And the next name is the one that changes everything, because she knew it was coming. She documented it, and she left a message 4 hours before it happened. If you have stayed with this investigation this far, and this is where this coverage needs you to stay, hit the like button on this video right now. Subscribe to True Crime Hex if you have not already. Share this video, because what comes next is the case that connects everything that has come before it. The case that has physical evidence, documented harassment spanning 3 years, witness testimony from a former British intelligence officer, and a text message sent 4 hours before a death that the documentation suggests should never have been classified as suicide. What comes next is Amy Eskridge. And everything about her case changes the way this entire investigation must be read. Amy Eskridge was 34 years old. She held a PhD. She held security clearance with the Department of Homeland Security clearance established through federal vetting processes that do not, by definition, approve individuals who are unstable, unreliable, or in any way cognitively compromised. She was, at the time of her death, simultaneously managing 3 research streams: a classified Homeland Security project designed to defend United States subway infrastructure from chemical, biological, and radiological attack, the kind of defensive program that requires not only the highest level of scientific competence but the highest level of institutional trust, and, concurrent with that work, she was researching anti-gravity propulsion technology and free energy extraction, working alongside her father, Dr. Eskridge, through a research institute they had founded together to develop and present to NASA a proposal centered on a triangular craft designation known as TR-3B. That name, TR-3B, is not unfamiliar to the community of researchers who have spent serious, credentialed, documented time investigating the government's classified aerospace programs. It refers to a triangular aircraft design whose existence has been implied never formally confirmed by a constellation of former military and intelligence personnel through channels ranging from congressional testimony to whistleblower filings. In Amy Eskridge's framing, the TR-3B was not a theoretical object. It was a vehicle whose propulsion problem she believed she had solved, or was in the process of solving, through her anti-gravity research. A craft that could move up, down, diagonally, laterally, in any direction, at speeds that conventional propulsion physics cannot currently account for. A craft that, paired with her free energy research, the extraction of what she described as limitless energy from the ether, a concept that would, if operationally realized, render the current global energy infrastructure not merely obsolete, but irrelevant, would represent not an incremental advance in aerospace science, but a categorical break from everything that defines the technological present. That is what Amy Eskridge was working on. That is what she held in her mind, and in her research files, and in the secured and encrypted communications she maintained with collaborators and confidants. And that is what made her, in the assessment of the people who were closest to her and who watched what happened to her over the final 3 years of her life, a target. The harassment did not begin suddenly. It did not announce itself with a single event that could be pointed to and named. It accumulated. It layered. It constructed itself over time with a methodology that Frank Milbourne, the former British intelligence officer who became Amy Eskridge's most trusted confidant and, ultimately, the executor of what she called her dead lady switch, described as deliberate and architecturally designed. Not random, not opportunistic. Designed. Constructed by someone with an understanding of how to make a person's experience of being targeted look from the outside, like the behavior of someone who has become unstable, like paranoia, like a pattern of irrational fear, like exactly the kind of mental deterioration that would cause official channels, law enforcement, institutional review boards, the FBI to discount what they were being told. Vehicle surveillance. It began there. Cars that appeared with a consistency and specificity that Amy Eskridge could document but that, in isolation, any individual observer could explain away as coincidence. Then, break-ins entries into her residence that left traces but not the kind of traces that produce police reports with prosecutorial value. Then, hacking sustained, technically sophisticated attacks on her computers and phones, requiring her to perform complete clean installs of her operating systems every other day. Not every week. Every other day. The level of technical resources required to sustain that kind of persistent digital penetration against someone who is actively responding to it, performing clean installs, removing hardware components, documenting the intrusions is not the level of resources available to an individual actor or a casual criminal enterprise. That is institutional capability. That is the kind of sustained, resourced, technically sophisticated operation that requires organizational infrastructure. She removed the Wi-Fi card from her computer, not to disable the device, to eliminate the primary pathway through which wireless intrusion was occurring. In response to that countermeasure, the intrusion adapted. Her computer began to receive what Milbourne described as a sustained microwave weapon, targeting a focused energy beam, directed at the location where she was working, penetrating walls and windows and drywall, the express purpose of which was to construct a three-dimensional model of her keystrokes. The technology reads the pressure and movement of human hands through barriers, through the physics of how focused microwave energy interacts with the thermal and kinetic signature of typing fingers, and from that data reconstructs what is being entered into a machine that is no longer connected to any wireless network. The person who authorized that capability knew exactly what they were doing. They knew what she had done to block conventional surveillance, and they had the technology to route around it. This is not speculation. This is documented testimony from a former British intelligence officer, a man whose professional background gives him the technical literacy to identify what he is looking at and whose credibility exists within an institutional framework that does not accommodate casual fabrication. When Frank Milbourne says he saw evidence of directed energy weapon deployment against Amy Eskridge, he is saying it as someone who has spent a career in a professional environment where such weapons are not theoretical objects. They are operational tools. He knows what the evidence of their use looks like, and he identified it in the documentation she shared with him. She was hit directly, not by a surveillance weapon operating at monitoring intensity, but at an intensity that produced physical consequences. Multiple bruises appeared on her body, bruises she showed to people, bruises she documented. And on at least one occasion, while conducting her homeland security work on the subway defense project, she was hit while in the presence of a colleague, another scientist, someone with the technical background to assess what had occurred, who independently identified what they were experiencing as a directed energy weapon attack. 2 witnesses. The same event. The same identification. Not one person's assessment. 2. Her hands showed visible burns. The kind of burns consistent with concentrated microwave exposure. The kind of burns that are difficult to explain through any other mechanism when they appear in a specific pattern on a specific part of the body in a specific context. She showed them. She documented them. And she kept working. Because Amy Eskridge did not stop. That is the detail that the narrative of mental instability cannot explain and does not accommodate. Someone experiencing a breakdown does not continue to successfully execute classified government contracts. Someone who is paranoid and unstable does not maintain the security clearance required to work on Homeland Security infrastructure defense. The federal vetting apparatus, the background check system, the ongoing security review process, the behavioral assessment protocols that exist precisely to identify and remove unstable personnel from classified environments, does not pass someone who has become functionally impaired. And Amy Eskridge remained cleared. She remained employed. She remained productive. She was, by every institutional measure available, a functioning, capable, credentialed scientist doing sensitive and important work. She went to the FBI. For 3 months, she attempted to work through official channels, providing documentation, providing evidence, providing the account of what was happening to her in sufficient detail and with sufficient corroboration that the investigation deserved to proceed. The FBI, after 3 months, told her they did not have jurisdiction. That is the documented response. Not, we investigated and found nothing. Not, the evidence does not support your account. Not, we believe there is an alternative explanation. They told her they did not have jurisdiction. That is a procedural response, not an evidentiary one. It is the institutional equivalent of closing a door without looking at what is behind it. She found Frank Milbourne. Or, more precisely, their correspondence began through channels that he has described. Channels consistent with the way someone operating under sustained surveillance would initiate contact with someone outside their institutional orbit. He initially categorized her as, in his words, an amusing person making claims that seemed extraordinary. And then she sent him documentation, videos, photographs, evidence she had accumulated over months and years of systematic, methodical, intelligence-literate documentation of what was being done to her. And Milbourne, a man with a professional background in the assessment of exactly this kind of documentation, changed his assessment. Because the documentation was real, the pattern it described was real, and the methodology it revealed was, to him, immediately recognizable. She told him he would believe her because of his background. You will understand the tradecraft, she told him. The harassment was designed to look, to anyone without that background, like irrational behavior. The people going through her possessions were not stealing from her. They were letting her know they had been there. The vehicles were not following her to any particular destination. They were letting her know they were present. The hacking and the intrusions were not extracting information she could not afford to lose. They were wearing her down, isolating her, creating an environment of total and sustained psychological pressure designed, over time, to achieve one of 2 outcomes: make her stop or make her break. And if she broke in a visible way, if her behavior became erratic, if she sought help and described what was happening to her, the system was already designed to receive that account as the account of someone who had lost their grip on reality. If I am found dead, she texted Frank Milbourne. I did not repeat, did not commit suicide. She sent that message 4 hours before she died. She was found dead in Huntsville, Alabama, near the NASA Space Flight Center, with a gunshot wound to the head that was officially classified as self-inflicted. And the people who knew her, the people who had documented and witnessed and independently corroborated what she had experienced, do not accept that classification. Frank Milbourne does not accept it, not because they are unwilling to accept difficult truths, but because the documented evidence does not support it, and because the documented pattern in which her death sits the pattern of 11 scientists, 11 cases, 11 departures from lives of classified work and sensitive research, demands that the classification be examined, not accepted. Now, let us talk about what connects all of them. Because there is a framework here, not a speculative one, not a conspiratorial one, but a documented, institutionally grounded framework that a federal investigation has found sufficient cause to examine, and that framework requires careful articulation. These 11 individuals do not share an employer. They do not share a single research specialty. They are distributed across NASA, the Department of Homeland Security, the Air Force Research Laboratory, Los Alamos National Laboratory, and the general contractor ecosystem of classified federal research. What they share is proximity to a specific category of knowledge. Knowledge about technologies that exist, or are approaching existence, at the boundary of what current human civilization uses, and what it might use if the political and economic constraints on technological disclosure were removed. Anti-gravity propulsion, nuclear propulsion for deep space travel, free energy extraction, memory metal with properties that current material science cannot replicate. These are not fringe topics at the edge of scientific credibility. These are documented research areas funded through the United States government's most classified programs, examined by credentialed scientists with top security clearances, and connected by institutional lineage and funding architecture to the programs that flow through General McCasland's oversight. The question is not whether this research exists. The documentation answers that. The question is, who benefits from the researchers not being alive? Who benefits from the sudden, unresolved absence of the people who hold institutional memory about where this research is, how far it has progressed, and what it could be if it were brought into public knowledge? The answer to that question is not simple, and this investigation does not pretend that it is. But the documented framework for understanding who has the resources, the technical capability, the institutional access, and the operational sophistication to execute what the evidence in these cases describes: the directed energy weapons, the sustained surveillance, the digital intrusions, the manufactured appearances of mental instability, the factory reset phones, the discarded identification, the military garment left by the side of the road. That framework does not point toward individual actors or criminal enterprises of the conventional variety. It points toward institutions, toward organizations with long operational timelines and specific interests in controlling who knows what and when they are allowed to know it. Frank Milbourne put it this way. He said he believes Amy Eskridge was killed, that word, killed, chosen deliberately and without qualification, by an aerospace company or by an actor with, in his exact words, the impunity and the ability to be able to act on the ground undiscovered for so long. That phrase, act on the ground undiscovered for so long, carries within it the full weight of what the documented evidence, in this case, implies. This is not a one-time event. This is a sustained operational capacity. This is an entity, or entities, with the resources to surveil a scientist for 3 years, deploy directed energy technology against her across multiple incidents, sustain a digital penetration campaign that requires daily countermeasures to manage, and ultimately, when the countermeasures hold and the target does not break and does not stop, to produce an outcome that can be officially classified as self-inflicted and closed. And she was not the only one. The congressional hearings that Matthew Sullivan was scheduled to testify at did not end with his death. They continued. Witnesses, with clearances and with documented knowledge of the government's handling of unidentified aerial phenomena, appeared before members of Congress and provided testimony that has entered the public record testimony. That, in the context of this investigation, takes on a weight it would not carry if it existed in isolation. Because what those witnesses described, what the congressional record now contains, is a picture of a government apparatus managing information about technologies and phenomena that it has determined. For reasons of its own, the American public is not ready or permitted to know, a compartmentalized management of knowledge, a structured invisibility. And the people in this investigation are the people who were inside that structure and who either threatened to breach it or whose continued existence created an unacceptable risk that the breach would occur. The FBI's involvement in this case is documented, and the nature of that involvement is significant. The Federal Bureau of Investigation does not allocate substantial investigative resources to cases that it assesses as having conventional explanations. When the FBI, in the language of those close to this investigation, jumped in feet first, It was not because the cases individually met some threshold of federal interest. It was because the pattern, the accumulation of cases, the institutional connections, the classified research contexts, the convergence of disappearances and deaths among personnel connected to the same programs and the same oversight structures crossed a threshold that the Bureau recognized as requiring its specific category of attention. That threshold is national security. That threshold is reached when the pattern of events implies a systematic targeting of individuals who hold classified knowledge, by entities with the capability to do so without producing prosecutable evidence. The Bureau did not find that threshold crossed in Amy Eskridge's individual case when she approached them for 3 months and was told they had no jurisdiction. But the aggregate, the 11 cases, the institutional web, the convergence of SAP-connected researchers and classified aerospace scientists in a pattern of death and unexplained disappearance produced a different assessment. And that different assessment produced resources. Federal resources. The kind that do not move quickly or visibly, but that, when they are committed, indicate that the people who analyze this for a living have looked at what is in front of them and concluded that it is not what it appears to be on the surface. Subscribe to True Crime Hex right now. Hit the like button. Share this video with anyone you know who is paying attention to this case, to these names, to what the evidence is demanding we ask. This channel does not have a network. This channel does not have a production company. What it has is an audience that understands why this matters, and every subscriber is a signal that truth-based, forensic, evidence-first coverage of cases like this has an audience that will not look away. There is a question that sits beneath all of the individual cases in this investigation. It is not the question of what happened to each person, though those questions are urgent and unanswered and demand resolution. It is a larger question. A question about the structural conditions under which these things happen. About the architecture of secrecy that makes it possible for 11 scientists to disappear or die under unresolved circumstances without producing a public accounting of institutional responsibility. The special access programs at the center of this investigation are not illegal. Their existence, the decision to classify certain research at a level beyond ordinary classified status, is authorized by law and by executive authority. The compartmentalization protocols are legal. The secrecy oaths are legally binding. The system, in its formal and structural dimensions, operates within a legal framework. What is not established by that legal framework, what the law does not authorize and does not sanction, is the elimination of individuals who hold the knowledge those programs contain. The law does not authorize the harassment of a scientist for 3 years with directed energy weapons. The law does not authorize the factory resetting of a researcher's phones before her disappearance. The law does not authorize whatever produced the outcome of Amy Eskridge's death. And yet, the evidence in these cases describes something that happened, is happening, and has been allowed to continue without a single criminal prosecution of the individuals or entities responsible. The absence of prosecution is not evidence of innocence. In cases involving classified programs, in cases where the evidence itself is classified, or where the institutional actors responsible have access to the investigative apparatus through which accountability would ordinarily flow, the absence of prosecution can be evidence of something else entirely. It can be evidence of exactly what Amy Eskridge told Frank Milbour it would be, a system designed so that if you go to the authorities and describe what is happening to you, the architecture of your experience has been constructed to ensure that you will not be believed. And if you cannot be believed, you cannot be protected. And if you cannot be protected, the outcome is the one the documentation now shows, 11 times over, with 11 names. Matthew Sullivan, who had the words he needed to say, and the congressional forum to say them in, and the federal legal protection to say them under, and who never said them. Joshua LeBlanc, 29 years old, whose Tesla spent 4 hours at an airport in the morning before a crash so severe that 3 days passed before his body could be identified. General William Neil McCasland, who left his phone and his smartwatch and his keys and his glasses and removed the gray Air Force sweatshirt before he walked away into an absence that his own wife does not expect will resolve in a conventional direction. Melissa Casillas, whose phones were factory reset before she walked east and did not return, and whose only trace in the physical record is 1 shoe in a canyon and 2 cadaver dogs with nothing to report, Chavez, whose name appears in the same institutional records as Casillas and who vanished within weeks of her. Monica Reza, who waved at her hiking companion and then was not there when the companion looked back. Stephen Garcia, who built parts for nuclear weapons and went for a walk and left behind the 3 items that define a person's traceable existence in the modern world. Amy Eskridge, who texted 4 hours before she died, who held her warning in writing and placed it in the hands of the person she trusted to say what needed to be said if she no longer could, who told him he would understand the tradecraft. And 3 more. 3 more names whose full details have not entered this record in sufficient completeness to reconstruct with the precision this channel requires, but whose institutional connections to the Air Force Research Laboratory, to the classified research ecosystem centered on the same programs and the same oversight structures, to the same documented pattern of departure without explanation, place them in the same forensic frame as every name that has come before. 11 names, 11 cases, one pattern, and a federal investigation that has found the pattern sufficiently serious to commit resources to an inquiry whose full scope has not been publicly disclosed. Here is what the precedent cases tell us. Not from this investigation, but from the broader documented history of what happens when classified knowledge approaches a threshold of disclosure, when the people who hold it approach a moment of speaking. Whistleblower protections exist because the documented history of this country contains enough cases of institutional retaliation against people who knew things and attempted to say them that Congress determined formal legal protection was necessary. Those protections are real. They are imperfect. And they cannot protect against a directed energy weapon. They cannot protect against a campaign of sustained, technically sophisticated harassment designed to make a person's account of their own experience sound like instability. They cannot protect against the kind of operational capacity that can remove a man from his home in under an hour and leave behind only a sweatshirt and a wife who calls 911 and says, in the calm voice of someone who already knows, that she does not think he wants to be found. The cases in this investigation are not closed. That is the documented fact with which this reconstruction must conclude, not because the investigation has reached its end, but because the public record has not yet produced answers. General McCasland has not been found. Melissa Casillas has not been found. Chavez has not been found. Monica Reza has not been found. Stephen Garcia has not been found. The explanation for what the Sentry Mode data shows about Joshua LeBlanc's Tesla at the Huntsville International Airport has not entered the public record. The identity of the entity or entities that deployed directed energy weapons against Amy Eskridge over a period of 3 years has not been prosecuted. The circumstances of Matthew Sullivan's death remain under scrutiny by people who knew him and knew what he intended to say. These questions do not close because the news cycle moves on. They do not resolve because the official records classify an outcome and file the case. They stay open because the people who were inside these programs, who held this knowledge, who were building towards something that the documented evidence suggests certain institutions, were determined to prevent those people had families who are still waiting, still asking. Still, pushing against the institutional silence that has settled over 11 cases with the weight of a classified filing that no one with authority has chosen to challenge from the outside. That silence has consequences. Every day it holds, it is a signal to the next researcher who is being harassed, to the next scientist who has sent the text message and is waiting to see if anyone acts on it, to the next general who is standing in his home in hiking boots and knows something is coming, that the system will not protect them, that the jurisdiction will be declined, that the investigation will stall, that the official classification will stand. This coverage is a challenge to that silence, not because this channel has the institutional power to compel disclosure, but because attention is evidence that the public record has not absorbed these cases without scrutiny. Every view, every subscriber, every person who watches this and carries these names forward into the conversations that shape what investigations get resources and what cases get pressure, that is what forensic, responsible, evidence-first journalism can produce. Not a verdict, not an arrest, but a record. A documented, precise, meticulously constructed record that says, this is what happened, this is who was involved, this is what the evidence shows, and this channel, this audience, has not moved on. We have not moved on from Nancy Guthrie. We have not moved on from the cases whose forensic trails go cold and whose families sit in the silence of official inaction. And we will not move on from these 11 names: Amy Eskridge, Matthew Sullivan, Joshua LeBlanc, General William Neil McCasland, Melissa Casillas, Chavez, Monica Reza, Stephen Garcia, and the 3 whose full stories are still being assembled from the documentary record with the precision this channel requires. Every subscriber, every like, every share of this content pushes these names further into the world. That is not a transaction. That is not a promotional appeal. That is a mission statement. The people who died, the people who disappeared, the people who walked away from their phones and their keys and their identification and their Air Force sweatshirts, they existed inside a system designed to keep their knowledge invisible. This coverage is a refusal to let that invisibility hold. Frank Milbour said he came forward because she trusted him to, because it was what she wanted, because he wants to prevent other scientists, young, brilliant, consequential scientists, from being killed. And because, in his assessment, a functioning democracy cannot sustain this kind of rot at its center and remain what it claims to be, those are not the words of a conspiracy theorist. Those are the words of a man with a career in intelligence, with a professional understanding of what the evidence in front of him means, with a relationship to one of the victims that gave him first-hand knowledge of what the 3 years before her death looked like from the inside. He believed her. The documentation compelled him to. And the documentation, assembled in its totality, the factory reset phones, the sentry mode footage, the discarded sweatshirt, the pre-death text, the burns on the hands, the shoe in the canyon, the man gone in under an hour, the 29-year-old who left behind his wallet and his keys and his phone compels the same conclusion. Something happened to these people. Something systematic. Something with institutional reach and operational sophistication and a very specific interest in ensuring that what they knew did not become what the public knew. And that something has not been named, has not been prosecuted, and has not been stopped. This is True Crime Hex. We stay until there are answers. We will not look away.